Good morning, everyone. My name's Elizabeth Fletcher, and I am a mediator and solicitor at Family Law and Partnership. And my friend Caroline Croft is a barrister at Quorum Chambers and a co-founder of Flank, which is family law advice for the neurodivergent community. Caroline and I worked together last year to produce a toolkit for mediators and NCDR practitioners working with neurodivergent clients. And we are really pleased this morning to talk to you both about flank and neurodivergence and also the toolkit more specifically. So I am now going to pass over to Caroline to start this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. It's really lovely to be here and to be taking part in Family Mediation Week, which is just such an important and brilliant initiative. I'm going to start by talking just a little bit about neurodivergence and giving a very rough introduction just to ground the rest of the session. And then I'll move through who and what flank are and some of the key considerations before handing over to Liz, who will walk you through the toolkit and really get into how that works and how that can support our practices. So if I can ask for the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So starting here, just some key points about neurodivergence. It's thought that up to 1 in 5 people might be neurodivergent. Estimates and figures vary. The Family Justice Council guidance on neurodiversity published last year now used 15%. But what we can say is it's a significant proportion of society. And there's also reason to think that it might be an even higher proportion in those coming into contact with the family justice system. There are three really important terms that we hear in this space, which I always like to define at the start of a talk. Neurodiversity is a term which reflects the idea that in any group, in any population, section of society, there will be a natural variance in the way that people's brains work. Now, neurotypical is a term that describes people whose brains work in the same way as the majority of people, and importantly, in the way that society and most people expect. Neurodivergence is when someone's brain works differently from those considered neurotypical, and that can include differences in processing and interpretation of information and in learning and acquiring information. Just pausing there, language really matters. It does in all spheres of life, but it's particularly important in relation to neurodivergence because very many neurodivergent people have a particular way in which they are most comfortable referring to or talking about their neurodivergence. And so I've always found it really helpful when working with someone who's neurodivergent to see what terms they're comfortable with and to establish a commonality of what we're going to be saying and how we're going to be talking. That can really, in my experience, help people to feel quite comfortable and quite accepted at an early stage when you're still gathering information. Neurodivergence is absolutely not a mental illness or something to be cured or fixed, but it is something that means that people can face barriers when coming into systems designed for neurotypical people. And it's something we need to be aware of, and it's something we need to learn to accommodate and make adjustments for. Now, the most commonly encountered forms of neurodivergence I've listed there on the slide, but we have autism, ADHD, dysgraphia, developmental coordination disorder, which includes dyspraxia as sort of the most commonly talked about and encountered form of that. Dyslexia and dyscalculia. I always like to pause and give a moment to dyscalculia. It's essentially challenges with kind of maths and number concepts and how figures and relate to each other. It's really important, in my view, that we're all increasingly aware of this. The research is about 20 years behind dyslexia, But it's absolutely core that we're able to recognize and respond to that when we're dealing with finances post separation. And so I always like to just flag it a little bit. I'm quite passionate about trying to raise awareness in relation to that. Now, all of those forms of neurodivergence, there's more information in the Family Justice Council guidance on neurodiversity that was published last January. I was absolutely delighted to be given the chance to contribute to that by the Family Justice System, by the Family Justice Council. And I would suggest reading the guidance. It's got some really helpful info. It's got lots of terms and definitions. It's got key themes from the research, and it has also got practical guidance. But we have much more tailored practical guidance built on many of the same principles as that guidance in our toolkit. Now, turning to the next really key point is that each neurodivergent person is going to have their own unique profile. They'll have individual strengths, individual challenges, preferences, and needs, as we all do, whether we're neurotypical or neurodivergent. There is a huge variety in how neurodivergence can be expressed. Even if somebody on paper has the same diagnosis as another person or a really similar profile, in reality, their strengths, their needs, and their preferences can be very different. There's quite a famous quote that was said by Dr. Stephen Shaw, who's an American academic, very heavily involved in autism and research into autism. And he said, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And the idea behind that quote was to really underline that presentation is unique and varies from person to person. And I think that that quote probably equally applies to all forms of neurodivergence. Now, neurodivergent profiles can include more than one type of neurodivergence. So there's increasingly commonly recognized a co-occurrence between autism and ADHD. And there are other factors that can really significantly impact how someone's neurodivergence is experienced by them and also externally expressed. So you might have co-occurrence of a mental or physical illness. Age is relevant, gender, ethnicity, cultural norms, any history of trauma and kind of significant life experiences, physical or mental illness, learning disabilities, all of those come together to feed into someone's neurodivergent profile. The other thing that I think is really important to recognize is that the impact of family breakdown and how that can play into someone's neurodivergence. So not only do you have the possibility that the anxiety and upset related to family breakdown might increase some of the barriers that someone's facing because of their neurodivergence. But it's also, I think, quite important to consider that no matter how bad the breakup is or how sadly things have ended, there's probably quite a good chance that someone's lost some practical support in relation to their neurodivergence, maybe even without realizing it. You know, a really classic example of if perhaps someone really struggles to read lots of documents and take on kind of financial information, so they've left it to the other partner. They're now in a position where they've got to try and do that, and they're probably going to need some support in doing that. Um, Next slide, please. Thank you. So just a really quick introduction to FLANC. So it stands for Family Law Advice for the Neurodivergent Community. We founded it almost 2 years ago now. And there's seven of us co-founders. We're all family lawyers, and we were all really worried about the barriers that neurodivergent people were facing when they were coming into contact with all aspects of the family justice system, all the way from care proceedings to a collaborative law to everything under the sun. We wanted to look at this as a system-wide issue. Our core aim is to drive change in the family justice system and empower practitioners of all types to recognise and respond to issues of neurodivergence. we recognize that to achieve change, holistic and collaborative approaches are vital. Collaboration is really, really important to us, and we were so delighted to collaborate with Liz and with Flip last year to produce this toolkit. Um, we've to try and capture holistic viewpoints, we've developed a multidisciplinary advisory committee. We've got judges, psychologists, speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, social work expertise, and above all, experts by experience, so that we're capturing and listening to as many voices as possible. And we always welcome feedback on our work, on the tools, and on the guidance that we're involved with. We were very delighted to win a couple of awards in 2024. We won the Resolution Innovation Champion at the 2024 Resolution Awards and the Family Law Innovation of the Year at the Family Law Awards that year. And in order to drive change, we are doing everything we possibly can to try and raise awareness, hopefully with a degree of success. We are delivering lots of training and education. We've already spoken to thousands of family justice professionals across all spheres, from judges to social work students to arbitrators, mediators, everyone you can imagine, and we're getting out there and we're trying to spread the word. We are campaigning for mandatory training about neurodivergence for family justice professionals, and we are producing and contributing to practical tools and guidance, one of which is our lovely toolkit. Um, Turning now slightly back to the focus of the session, why do mediators need to be able to recognise and respond to issues of neurodivergence? And if I could ask to move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So there we have the question I've just posed. Now, society at large is set up for neurotypical people, and the result is that neurodivergent people can face barriers to participation, to support and to services when they come into contact with systems designed for neurotypical people. So, what that means is that neurodivergent people can face barriers to participation when they're trying to mediate or want to mediate if we don't approach that process in a neuro-inclusive and a neuro-informed way. So part of all of this is us wanting, and Flip also wanting, to ensure that we were really empowering practitioners and mediators to create a neuro-inclusive space and a neuro-informed space, and supporting practitioners to navigate something which at first can seem possibly quite overwhelming, and like there's a lot to it. But what we're trying to do is break down and provide a simple approach to really help navigate issues of neurodivergence and ensure that we are taking them into account and considering them. So, neurodivergence can be relevant to the process of mediation in two ways. Number one, the actual process itself, and number two, the outcome. So, in terms of process, Liz will go through this in much more detail, but it's about identifying barriers to participation and thinking about adjustments to overcome those barriers that you've identified. This obviously applies to the adult participants, to mediation, but also, of course, any neurodivergent child if child inclusive mediation is being pursued or explored. Taking into account the participants' neurodivergence and addressing any barriers to participation arising out of their neurodivergence or any other feature of their profile and functioning will improve the quality of communication and ultimately the likelihood of mediation being successful. It's about looking quite carefully for barriers, using the tools that we're providing, because they're not always obvious. And sometimes, someone's facing a barrier and they react to it in a way that is mistaken for obstructiveness or difficulty or overwhelm. And it's just having a slightly broader spectrum, I think, when we're thinking about people's suitability for mediation and what's going on and how people can be supported and how they can get the most out of the process. Liz is going to talk quite a bit more about how the toolkit supports practitioners to identify barriers and make adjustments to overcome them. But one of the really important messages about making adjustments to overcome barriers is they're often extremely effective, they're often common sense, and they're often fairly straightforward. And they might be things that you're already very used to using in your practice, such as regular breaks, thinking about the time of day that your meetings are taking place, thinking differently about how to communicate information to people. Identifying and making the right adjustments ultimately can be transformative and support agreement being reached in a position where without adjustments, maybe agreement wouldn't have been reached. And something which I always think is really important when we're thinking about making adjustments for people is what are this person's strengths and how might we be able to leverage those to help them overcome some of the barriers that they're facing. Now, the second point, moving away from process, is that neurodivergence can be relevant to outcome of mediation. Um, One really good example that's often talked about in relation to many neurodivergent people is that there can be additional struggles with new environments and changes to environment. So you might have a spouse who really doesn't want to leave the former matrimonial home. That knowing that, understanding that, taking that into account might be able to help the parties move through to actually reach an effective outcome. Thinking about a child that maybe has those difficulties with moving or changes to environment, actually, is nesting possibly going to be the right outcome here to support that child to have regular contact and spending regular time with both parents? Or does that need to be thought about when there's concerns about whether a child can tolerate a midweek overnight stay with their other parent? So those are just some examples. There's no one size fits all, and it really does come down to the circumstances of every case. But I hope that's a helpful kind of example to get us thinking about some of those issues in relation to outcome. Next slide, please. So, benefits of mediation for neurodivergent people. There is no inherent reason why mediation or any form of dispute resolution is not suitable for neurodivergent people. And at Flank and at Flip, we really strongly believe that neurodivergent people should not be denied access to the benefits of mediation and dispute resolution. In the same way that there are situations which are not suitable for mediation involving neurotypical people, of course, there will be situations involving neurodivergent people that are not suitable for mediation. But it's not often going to be solely or even at all as a result of the neurodivergence. Yes, it's all part of something to tie into the suitability assessment, but mediation can be an excellent opportunity and outcome for neurodivergent people. It's particularly important to remember the significant role that dispute resolution generally can play for neurodivergent people because court proceedings are not neuroinclusive and they require quite a lot of careful work, adjustments, and planning to make them neuroinclusive. So everything that we can do, I think, to support neurodivergent people to access dispute resolution in all its forms, I think is a really good thing. Mediation is particularly powerful, in my view, for neurodivergent people because it can be tailored to its participants quite well and quite easily. If you have neurodivergent people who struggle with, again, uncertainty, changes of personnel, changes of environment, you can avoid a lot of that by using mediation. There can be far more certainty about when things are going to happen. You can have a much shorter process than you would have if you were in the court arena. There are some really, really positive benefits there, in my view. I wrote an article with Naomi Good, who is a psychotherapist at the mediation space, actually looking in a bit more detail about neurodivergence and suitability for mediation. I've put the reference there. It was in the Family Law Journal. Please do have a look at it if you're interested in perhaps seeing a little bit more about this topic and some of our thoughts. And of course, that had the benefit of a psychotherapeutic perspective as well, which I think was quite an interesting voice also to add to this conversation. Um, Turning now to the next slide, please. So, suspected and undiagnosed neurodivergence. I feel like this is the thing I get the most questions about. So the majority of neurodivergent people are undiagnosed. Yes, that's changing all the time, and it's really great to see people reaching out for diagnosis, people increasing awareness and increasing acceptance. But the reality is, we are very often working with neurodivergent people who are not diagnosed. Now, the toolkit, as well as the FJC guidance, are all designed for use where there is a diagnosis, but also where there is no diagnosis, but neurodivergence is suspected. And we have tools within the toolkit to help practitioners look out for potential issues of neurodivergence. The key to working with any neurodivergent person, in my view, is not to focus too much on labels and diagnosis anyway. It's always, whether you've got a diagnosis or not, about understanding that person's profile, their strengths, their needs, and how that needs to be taken into account, both in terms of outcome and process. And it's, in my view, quite a helpful way of working. And I think a way of working that many of us are already doing, perhaps without even realizing, is to sort of see each client or each person we're working with as the person that they are and think, right, in my professional knowledge and judgment, what is going to be good for this person about this process? What might this person find more challenging about the process that they want to embark on? And really entering into that kind of collaborative space where you're bringing your professional skills and expertise, they're sharing information about themselves, and you're navigating through to help them identify barriers, to help them identify adjustments, to help identify factors relevant to outcome. Um, the You don't absolutely don't need a diagnosis or a label to make adjustments for someone. And if we really focus on that neuro-inclusive, needs-driven, strengths-based, person-focused way of practicing, it's helpful because you can factor in issues not related to neurodivergence. So, for instance, if there is also a mental health issue or a physical health issue, and in my view, it's quite a valid way of working where there's any form of barrier to participation or any kind of vulnerability. I'm going to hand over to Liz now, and she's going to talk to you in a much more focused way now about the toolkit, her contribution to it, and of course, her really important perspective as an accredited mediator. So thank you very much, and over to you, Liz.
Thank you, Caroline. Um, the- I'll have the next slide, please, Julie. I would just say on that last slide, though, that Caroline was talking about, I do find often that with adults who've had a recent or relatively recent diagnosis of a neurodiversity and then are coming to, then obviously if they're coming to see us, have then had a relationship breakdown, they are often suffering from high levels of anxiety, and that is something that is needs to be fed into our a mediation process, or indeed any family law process, as another vulnerability. So to talk about our toolkit that we worked on together, it's designed as a website, and that is the link. There will be at the end of this PowerPoint a QR code to the Flank website, and also which also links you to that toolkit and various other documents that I'm going to talk about. So you can have a look at that in your own time. It's worth saying that this is, just to repeat, it's aimed at mediators and practitioners. It's not for the general public. It's there as a resource to support the professionals in working with neurodiverse people rather than for neurodiverse people themselves, particularly. It's providing options and tools to enable a mediator to tailor the process. So there's lots and lots of information, and some of the documents are on there as Word documents intentionally so that you can download them and use them for your own work with your particular client. Sometimes it can look like, wow, there's an awful lot of information on here, but not all of it's going to be relevant to every client. We've just put as options in there so that you can tailor it to the particular needs of your particular client at that time. And as Caroline's already said, it's very much the aim is to maximize participation. As mediators, we're always looking to make the best process to provide the best support and to uh, enable solutions. So really, this is uh, another checklist and toolkit to support mediators in doing that work. If I could have the next slide, please, Julie. So, how does this toolkit work? We essentially are going to do three things in our toolkit. The first is to screen for the specific needs to support a client and work out what they need to help process work. Having identified those specific needs, we then identify the adjustments that we need to make. And then we suggest that everyone signs an agreement of process regarding those adjustments at the outset of your mediation so that both participants, their advisors, if they've got legal advisors involved as well, and the mediator have all worked out and committed at the beginning to the way that the process is going to work. Clarity at the beginning is obviously going to make a much more supportive process, and it also means that we can keep the guardrails in place right throughout for clients. It's also, I guess, worth making sure everyone understands that if one participant is neurodiverse and the other is not, and we're looking to put adjustments in place to support the neurodivergent participant, we've got to think about the impact of those adjustments on the non-neurodivergent participant. So all of this needs to be thought about before we really get into a process, so that once you're into a joint process, we can then focus on the issues at large that the participants are wanting to get come to mediation for in the first place. Um, okay, thank you, Julie. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So the obvious place to start trying to identify those needs is at the MIAMS. We suggest that we're in those initial calls prior to a MIAMS, where and referral forms that are completed prior to a MIAMS, that questions are perhaps are routinely asked, and if there is a diagnosis, then perhaps you can ask for a copy of that diagnosis, any accompanying documentation, any particular needs that really can help a mediator to make a MIAM succeed even before a decision to move into a joint mediation goes forward. If there isn't a neurodiverse diagnosis, and as Caroline said, very often there isn't, then we have prepared a document called an All About Me document, which is on the website and can be downloaded as a Word document, which you can suggest a participant completes before the MIAMS. That would be a confidential document in the way that everything to do with MIAMS is confidential. But within that document, there are lots of questions asked which enable participants to explain themselves and take time over thinking about how best to explain their particular situation. So it's asking questions such as, what causes me stress? What are my strengths? So am I good at detail, not so good at big picture? What how do I want to be addressed? How do I want to receive information? How do I assimilate written information, oral information? As a very simple example, I had a client last week say to me, I'm great in person, I'm okay on video, can't do telephone. So good to know right at the start, that's not going to be the right way of communicating with that client, so I just shouldn't do it. So that All About Me document gives gives lot really can help a mediator to kind of get the lay of the land before you've even got started. So ideally, that's completed before the MIAMS. In the MIAMS, really explore the contents of that document or the neurodiversity diagnosis, if that's what you have. Also spend quite a lot of time, and I do appreciate that there's a lot to cover already in a MIAMS, but really take time to explore with a client how the, how meetings would work well for them, whether online is better because they've got the structure of being in their own home and everything surrounding, or whether the technology is actually something they would just rather not deal with, is speaking on video harder than actually just all being in the same room. They find social cues easier in person than in on video. Those are the kinds of issues it's really good to explore early on, because obviously we know as mediators we're always thinking about what's this process going to look like once we get into a joint session. Also, just a reminder that as all mediators know, you're screening for domestic abuse in MIAMS as well. But please always bear in mind that the two issues can be connected, and the control and the issues of neurodiversity may be going hand in hand within a relationship. So we just need to always have that in mind when we're screening for both of vulnerabilities and for domestic abuse. Julie, if you have the next slide, please. So, what challenges might a mediation participant face as a barrier? Verbal communication is an obvious one, and so you're always thinking about how would we combat that? Speaking more slowly, avoiding using metaphors is a kind of obvious one. Tone, shorter sentences. That is always kind of being really often I find the clients are very quick to be able to tell you actually how they are best hear you, how best they assimilate information. So really listening to what they what they want, a classic skill of mediation, is going to be really important. Processing written material. Caroline's touched on this, and that's very much can be a feature of a neurodivergence. So this is just really about thinking that through in terms of not writing long, detailed letters may be an issue. I had a client the other day saying, please just send me bullet points. I can't assimilate dense, long letters, which I was delighted about. And then take is it better that they get information orally? Is it better within the mediation? Do they need to have a trusted person come to the mediation? That is a real complexity in terms of the balance of a joint session. So it would need to be thought through, and also obviously the identity of that trusted person is going to be very important. But it is something that can be thought through. Social communications and cues, that goes back again to the in-person or versus video issue. Being explicit, it can be important for a mediator to be really explicit with what the expectations are in terms of communication. And I certainly have had conversations about actually let's think about how we're going to ensure that your voice is heard in this process. Are you going to be able to express yourself properly, and what is the best way for you to be able to get your point of view out? Don't rely on body language in the same way, and that they're necessarily taking the cues of body language in the same way. Sometimes sitting side by side is something that's easier. Sitting opposite each other can be a challenge. So just always thinking about, obviously there's the makeup of the room, that face to face is going to be, if that's not an option, then that's online out the window. So think about how that's going to be managed. Numerical challenges, Caroline's talked about neurodivergence in the context of numerical challenges. Certainly in a finance mediation, that's really going to have to be thought out very carefully. So that it may be then that the trusted friend needs to come in to support them in assimilating information, or maybe they just need more time. And taking documents away after shorter sessions, having time to think it through, may just simply be all they need. Focus and concentration, shorter sessions is an obvious one, but uh, there's also things to be thought through with that in terms of how sessions are managed. Sometimes there can be the problem the other way that if there's a real detail focus for the neurodivergent person, they may really just want to go into the detail of it. Meanwhile, the non-neurodivergent person is saying after an hour and a half, that's enough. So that again has to be thought through. Environment, think about your office space if it's going to be in person. Think about whether they need to see that office space in advance to get a sense and comfort. If there's, it may be that there's issues of ticking clock, something that can really cause stress. That just needs to be thought through, discussed with the mediation participant, and considered before mediation can go forward. Julie, could I have the next slide, please? So we're covering quite a lot of this, but the 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 balance of need is also the adjustment that what can be thought through. This is all contained on the website, but with more examples than I've listed here, without clogging up the slides. But there's these are all issues that you need to think about if your neurodivergent client is expressing need for any of these changes. But equally, it's also adjustments that need to be thought through with the non-neurodivergent participant. Um, some of the changes that are needed may have a cost impact, and so everyone's going to need to be on board with the reality of that cost change. For example, shorter sessions probably means more sessions, and that would have a potential cost impact. Um, the thinking about colours, types, we've been careful with our presentation this morning to make it suitable for neurodivergent people. As you can see, the colouring is not black. So that's something that is just a question of conversation with your client as to how they best assimilate things. Most of those things, other than the last one, which I will just cover about a roadmap of process, although it's obviously standard in MIAMS to talk about what happens if we go forward from here into a joint session, likelihood of number of joint sessions, that kind of thing. It can be more important for neurodivergent people to have clarity as to what a roadmap of a mediation process is going to look like. And it perhaps can be that a more detailed process needs to be worked out in advance. I certainly have found with neurodivergent clients that having often it in a more pictorial form with plans and maps of how a process is going to look, as opposed to the kind of standard list and more writing can cause more stress. So actually just thinking that through and trying to explain in different ways to a mediation neurodivergent client how this process is going to move forward, when they might want to get legal input, when they might want to have a pause, when there will be more documents to gather if it's financial mediation. All of that stuff is better to kind of set out at the outset and really explore in a detailed MIAM session. If I could have the next slide, please, Julie. Once we've worked out all of those needs and adjustments in the MIAMs with both, there's two separate MIAMs, obviously, what are we going to do with all of that information? So our suggestion is that you agree an agreement of process prior to starting the joint session. That can be attached to your agreement to mediate, and equally, we would say if the mediation doesn't ultimately succeed, then that agreement process could be ported into other out of court dispute resolution processes, such as arbitration, so that your clients, having been through this process once of working out what adjustments are needed, that those adjustments can continue and they don't have to keep reinventing the wheel if the mediation doesn't succeed. Within that agreement of process, therefore, you set out the adjustments that you've agreed, because you will need to, if you're going to, for example, have those shorter sessions, the other participants going to have to agree that. It's worth saying that I have actually rarely had difficulty in working out those adjustments with the other participant. Obviously, they've been in a relationship with that person, so they're well aware, far more aware than you are, of the challenges that their former partner is facing. And they are also often, if anything, more anxious to ensure that the neurodivergent participant feels able to be involved in this. So I haven't had a situation where the non-neurodivergent participant has been objecting to any of these adjustments. But I think it is really important that everyone knows what the adjustments are right at the outset, so there's no sense of lack of balance or fairness within the process. The agreement process is on the website. You can download it as a Word document. Again, it's long and detailed, the idea being that you can delete all the sections that you don't need for every particular mediation. I've already said, but I'm just reminding here about the consequences of changing the parameters of a usual mediation process. You will no doubt have given standard information at a first client call about costs and how that's going to work. And if some of these adjustments incur cost consequence, obviously that needs to be thought through. If the agreement of process may take further involvement prior to joint sessions beginning, or it may be that a joint session or separate sessions are needed to just work out the contents of that agreement of process. But once it's in place, you've got something solid for your clients to rely on in terms of how a session is going to work. If we could have the next slide, please, Julie. So practicalities of that agreement process. We would suggest that everyone signs that agreement of process with the agreement to mediate. Everyone's committed to working it out in mediation. Everyone's committed to working it out with those adjustments in place. So that extra signature would give just a little bit of extra strength to those commitments. Attaching it to agreement to mediate enables it to be part of that process but move forward, as I've said, and it's providing a clarity of expectation as to what the process is going to look like, and improves the chances of success of the mediation, as Caroline's already set out. The greater the clarity and greater sense of participation, the more likely the whole process is to succeed and give better outcomes for clients. Next slide, please, Julie. So that is that's the QR code to the website. That is, it gives you both onto the Flank website, which can give you a lot more information about neurodiversity in general, and also about the support that Flank is giving to other parts of the family justice system. It also gives you links to the toolkit, and it also gives you further information about neurodiversity in general. I should also say that all the documents are free to download. It's all there for anyone who needs it, and we really hope that you get help and support in your practice from this information. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
We've had a few in the Q&A box. one question I answered as we were going along, which was for a link and a copy of the All About Me document to be shared in the chat. Um, I know we haven't got the chat function on for this webinar, but I did send back to the person who asked that the screening and participation tools page of the toolkit, where both the All About Me document and the agreement of process document are embedded, and then they download when you click on them. So that's the sort of best place to go to, is to go to that page, the screening and participation essentials of the toolkit. And if anyone practices outside of mediation, there's also a further version of the All About Me document with less of a dispute resolution focus on the Flank main website under resources. So and the point about these documents is that you tailor them to what the situation needs. And as you get used to working with them, both the agreement of process and the All About Me, you might even add in bits that you found really helpful. Please do let us know, if there's something that you've been routinely adding to your All About Me document or agreement of process, please let us know. We really welcome feedback on what the resources we're producing. So main thing is all downloadable off the toolkit website. Also, other downloadable resources on the Flank website, which are they're more general or for other purposes, slightly less targeted towards the dispute resolution space. All the dispute resolution space stuff is really in the toolkit. So I hope that's helped with that query. Then we've got some really interesting questions coming in here. Um,
One, Caroline, about book recommendations
oh,
to understand about neurodiversity and to provide support. I wondered if you had any that you would particularly recommend.
yes. So there is for autism, there's a book called Autism and the Law. The name of the author now, of course, totally escapes me. I'm looking up at my bookshelf, seeing if I can see it, but I think it's probably on the other bookshelf. Very unhelpful. That's a very good book. There is also a book being published by a barrister who is part of Flank's advisory committee, called Natasha Kalik. She practices up in the Northwest. And she's published a sort of practical guide to neurodivergence and I think family law. I haven't had the chance to read it yet. It's being published imminently, but I'm sure that will have loads and loads of sort of helpful introductory stuff. But I do think, and I have to say, that a really good starting point is the FJC guidance, because not only does it summarize a lot of the core information, it also points to lots of research and lots of other resources that can be helpful, and you can kind of take from that what you're interested in or what you're trying to learn more about. Um,
There has also been a recently reported case, which I appreciate is more from the law, the mediation side, where the one of the parties was neurodivergent and had to give evidence in a fact-find hearing, and had been supported with cue cards. Although obviously this is mediation and not the law, it is an interesting judgment, and you're going to say, and what's the name of it? And that's slightly escaping me at the moment, but we do send an email out after this webinar, so I'll ensure that the case reference is in there, because it does provide a lot of detail about how to absorb how clients with neurodivergence can provide the information that they need to get across, and how professionals need to work on how they support clients doing that.
Absolutely, and I think that's what's really that underlines something that I feel, you know, quite often at pains to try and emphasize, is that this isn't siloed. I practice across all different areas of family law and in really different situations. And a lot of the things that I bring to my practice, I modify depending on the situation and the circumstance, but they're valid, whether I'm advising a client on a really contentious fact find, whether I'm supporting a client with trying to agree some contact arrangements, whatever it is. It's valid in different circumstances. And so absolutely those judgments. There's another really famous judgment they talk about a lot that's an old care proceedings judgment, all about again how an autistic mother was supported to communicate and give her best evidence. And again, it's quite similar to that recent Q cards judgment in that it's looking at how are we meeting neurodivergent people's communication needs and the barriers that they're facing. Um,
There's
so yeah.
there's an important question here that I should answer. Were neurodivergent people involved in designing these tools? Yes, is the answer.
Absolutely.
Um, I know that Flank work with stakeholders very much before any of the materials that are published um, uh, have had the stakeholder involvement with neurodivergent people.
Absolutely. And that's the importance of the holistic approach and also having, as many different forms of neurodivergence as possible as well, because, we need a variety of neurodivergent voices and experience to inform everything that we do.
There's a question here. There's a lot of work for any client to do pre-MIAM. Yes, there is in completing document in well, in completing our documents. If not completed, do we repeat them more orally in the MIAM? Yes, and I would really want to go through that and really explore in the same way that if anyone's in completing a referral form, something that you're not quite sure about, or even think you are sure about, I would definitely go through that all about me document within the MyM and really explore um, what um, what the issues are and what support's needed. And sometimes they haven't completed a form and we need to just do it in the session. But it's yes, I would definitely want to make it part of the discussion in MIM as to how what support they need. Um, there's a question about parents who have children who are neurodivergent um, and support that they need. Caroline, I guess it's more of a question in flank in terms of whether there's additional support for.
Yeah, so I mean, parents, so it comes in all forms, and we kind of deal with all different situations. So, I've had clients come to me very concerned that they think their child might be neurodivergent. I've had parents fighting for a diagnosis. I've had parents who are kind of reeling from a diagnosis sometimes. Uh, Parents who maybe don't accept their child's diagnosis, and so. I think the really important thing is to always, when thinking about a neurodivergent child, is what support is currently available to this child. What are school doing? Are they receiving any support through health or kind of universal services? Is that support enough, or do we need to understand the child's profile better? Do we need to be looking at different avenues of support? And thinking always how that's impacting on what you're trying to achieve with your client, whether it's, trying to provide the child with stability and reassurance that means that spending time with the other parent works better, or whether it's thinking about whether or not a child should relocate to another country, or all of there's so many different shapes that it can come in. But my starting point is always, when thinking about a neurodivergent child, what do we already know about this child's profile? What more can we find out about this child's profile, either through formal assessment, which might be necessary in some circumstances, or can we get some more information from school? Can we get some more information from the GP? Could we get some more information from CAMS? and just trying to build a picture of the child. And again, thinking about then how that's relevant to outcome. And if we are looking at a child's inclusive mediation process, how that's relevant to how that aspect, the child inclusive aspect is handled. I, I hope that's a helpful sort of starting point. And I think so often the trick is simply what do we know? What else can we find out? What other information is out there? And that's whether you're thinking about a child or an adult. Um, I'm just having a look at, oh, there's so many brilliant questions. Oh, and thank you, Karen Newman. You're absolutely right. It is Adam Feinstein is the author of the Autism in the Law book that I was talking about. I'm really grateful. Of course, I have total mind blank when put on the spot. Um, then just looking at a couple of others of these. Um, a really early question that came in. Please, can you give some examples of the barriers that may not be obvious so that we can be alert to? Um, I can start us off with that question. I really like that question because actually it recognizes something very important about neurodivergence, which is it can be outwardly invisible. And the person that you are working with is is ultimately the primary source of information that's going to help you identify barriers. Now, there might be some tells that we're kind of used to looking out for anyway. So, for instance, the client that always forgets their reading glasses, actually, is there something a little bit more to that? Is there something going on? Is there something we can talk about in terms of supporting with written documentation? But often the only way to identify a lot of barriers, particularly barriers in receiving and processing information, is to really, get to know the client, go through the All About Me document, reflect on how they're assimilating the information that you're giving and how it sort of gets repeated back to you. It's easier often to pick up on barriers with how someone communicates or how someone tolerates an environment, but not always. So, for instance, I've had clients whose neurodivergence that they have, real sensory needs, and the environment, often the courtroom, because I'm obviously in court quite a bit, is not meeting those needs. And instead of it being obvious that that's what's going on, actually they stop coming to hearings or they get really overwhelmed and leave. And it's just always thinking, how can I support you? You're struggling with, tolerating the court environment or the mediation room or whatever it is. How can I help you? What can we do to change that? So it's really, working in a collaborative way with that person. And just always looking at things through the spectrum of is there a possible neurodivergence issue here? In the same way that we all approach our practices looking out for domestic abuse, looking out for a mental health issue or a cognitive or a capacity issue. It's adding in that spectrum for like um, that lens, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say, of also when I'm thinking about all these things that might be going on for my client do we need to be thinking about neurodivergence here? So I think that's probably the best answer that I can give. But I do also want to send the message that I think as family practitioners, we're already pretty good at understanding the people that we're working with and looking out for issues that are impacting them that maybe even they haven't really articulated or understood for themselves. We do have those tools. And here at Flank and Flip, we're hoping to support everyone to apply those really to neurodivergence.
Thank you, Caroline. I hope that we've managed to answer everyone's questions. I'm conscious that this webinar will end very shortly. So I'd just like to thank you very much, everyone who came along this morning and gave up their time on a Friday morning. And I hope you find the toolkit useful and the Flank website useful and that this supports you in your practices going forward.